everyone, welcome back to the Strong Mind podcast. In this episode, I speak with Matt Pycroft and Aldo Kane about masculinity. The core question is, what does it mean to be a man in 2025, and what does it mean to be a man in the world of climbing, outdoors and adventure? We often think that these spaces men do well. They're quite masculine areas. They're often defined by toughness, control, independence, pushing through fear. We admire the stoic expedition leader, the fearless climber, the person who keeps it together no matter what the situation. And in this space and industry, we think of men as thriving, and in some ways they are. But is that always the case, or is it just that only some men thrive? And are they thriving in superficial ways? So we're starting in 2025, or have been, kind of questioning those traditional scripts. They're being rewritten and in some cases discarded altogether. At the same time, and this is a really in vogue topic of conversation at the moment, there's growing evidence that many men and boys are being left behind and they're struggling to find their place. Young men are falling behind in the education system. Young women actually out-earn young men now. And then there's a bit of a mental health crisis with men. They are four times more likely to die by suicide compared to women, and they're significantly less likely to seek help. But way fewer men are in therapy, for example. So I think, a lot of the conversations that we've been having about gender equality, that are necessary, are also causing some men to feel lost, disconnected, or even just uncertain about what it means to be a man today, what healthy masculinity looks like. Men are hearing messaging that they are kind of toxic or dangerous, and worryingly, this makes some men angry and motivated to seek out unhelpful or even dangerous ideologies. So, this is a conversation that's happening in broader society at the moment, and I'm kind of jumping on that bandwagon. But it's also just something that's really interested me personally for a long time. I'm interested in gender equality in general, but I just feel like the patriarchy, or just like our social landscape in general, affects men and women in unhelpful ways. It's often framed that sexism just affects women, but it's just not what I've seen personally in my life. I've seen a lot of the men in my life suffer more than the women in my life. I've seen more mental health issues, more addiction, less social support, more loneliness. That's what I've personally noticed, and yet I've not noticed conversations that reflect that. So yeah, that's what we do here. We talk honestly about fear, shame, mental health, emotions, fatherhood, the pressure to always be a certain type of man, body image. And yeah, we talk about what healthy masculinity looks like, how the kind of adventure sports world can help or hinder the journey that men are on at the moment. And I've got two amazing guests, perfect for this conversation. The first is Aldo Kane, who is a world record-setting adventurer, former Marines sniper, and elite safety consultant. He's operated in war zones, he's been in volcanoes, he's rowed across the Atlantic. But he's also an amazing role model. He's really vocal about mental health and the mental toll of high-stress roles, and the importance of emotional resilience. He's also a father of 2 boys, so he brings that lens into it. So yeah, Aldo was great for this conversation, and different perspective from Matt Pycroft, who's a climber, filmmaker, podcaster, and creative director at Cold House. He spent years documenting elite adventurers on the sharp end, but he's also really curious about the inner journey, as you know if you've listened to his podcast, the Adventure Podcast. And in this conversation, he reflects on fatherhood, the emotional cost of always appearing strong, his partnership with his wife, and why vulnerability might be the most underrated skill in the outdoors. All right, I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you like what we're doing here, please give us some digital love, comments, feedback, reviews, ratings. You know how to do it, and we would really appreciate it. All right, let's get into it. All right, Matt, go with your clever prep.
So I think men are the most important thing in the world.
We are going to start with that. You do know that, don't you?
Oh no.
Yeah, boom. A clever edit. If you don't say it, dude, they can't use it.
All right. Hi, guys. Thanks for being here. All right. So we're going to try to broach the actually in vogue concept right now. I don't know if it's entered the outdoor space yet, but it's in the sort of wider world. When we do look out there, masculinity is very much in vogue, but it's a conversation I've wanted to have for ages. And I've actually been a little bit nervous to have it. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be here. But so, right, let's get stuck in right away with the really easy question for both of you. Of what is masculinity. And I kind of want to just, I know that there's not going to be an easy answer to that question, obviously. But I want to hear what you have to say, like, what comes up for you, basically, when I say what is masculinity. So maybe we can start with Matt.
Oh, great. Thanks. Well, thanks for inviting me. I mean, this is a topic pretty close to my heart, as I think you know, and I'm doing a lot more work around this these days. So I do have strong views on it all. But like, I think it's all individual, and that's something I'd quite like to talk about today. Is there is no answer what is masculinity? So I'll answer from my perspective, and my masculinity is hugely important to me. It's not an accident that I'm a bearded, heavily tattooed man who works out, spends a lot of time outdoors, and takes pride in like looking and being traditionally masculine. Those things are not an accident. It's a huge part of my identity, but masculinity to me isn't about dominance or control. I'm going to be the first to say the name. We'll probably say it a lot. It's the antithesis of the Andrew Tate masculinity. It's for me, it's about how you use your inherent strengths that you have as a man. And I mean strength in a few different ways. Real strength is not about intimidation. It's about creating safety or nurturing a community of safety, challenging the bad behavior of others, protecting and serving those who need it when they need it. And I think masculinity these days means being emotionally honest, being courageous enough to care and admit when you're wrong or you've hurt someone, and being strong enough to be vulnerable. It took me a long time to learn that the bravest things I've ever done are not climbing mountains or abseiling off big cliffs. It's learning to be vulnerable, to admit when I'm sad, when I'm failing, when I'm weak, and when I need support. That feels brave these days, and I take huge pride in it. And that's the kind of man I want to be, and the kind of masculinity I want to model for my kids.
Wow, that's a strong
Boom.
start. Boom. Mic
Yeah,
drop.
cheers.
Aldo, how are you going to follow that?
Thanks for having me on, Hazel. I guess for me, I probably don't have a succinct description of it, but I've spent my entire life working in inverted commas alpha male heavy environments, from being in the Marines to expeditions, as you guys know. And I I have never been internally like biased. I never look inside with anxiety and depression, if that makes sense. I'm always externally focused. So I have never really thought about what it means to be a man until very recently, because I was just being a man, for all the good parts of that and all the bad parts of that. Um, I now have two young boys, and it's only in the last 4 years that I've really started to dive into what does it mean for me to be a man, and that is now almost the exact same question as what does it mean for me to be the best dad that I can be. And that's probably, for me, it's about masculinity. And I should also say at the start, I'm not qualified to talk in this other than that I am a man. Um, and also, for me, I'm not going to be bashing the negative side of this, because I think the whole narrative needs to change. I think we need to be talking about positive role models and positive way forward. So, it's essentially about being, for me, masculinity, as I am a man, is about being someone of strong character, courageous, honest, like integrity, having grit, perseverance, wisdom, humor, all of these things that is, moral courage, not the ability to, jump out into a hail of bullets or to carry the most bags up a cliff, but to make the right decision when it's the hardest thing to do, and especially when no one's watching. So, like, moral courage, confidence in coping, optimism, like all of these things that make you a good human being, not just a man, but a good human being, woman or male. So it's not as punchy and short as Matt's, but essentially, I'm a bloke. Masculinity has never been a thing that I've questioned, because I'm a man, I must be masculine. But now, having kids, I'm much more aware of how my negative emotions, for example, affect the whole family tree in my house. And that comes down to more self-awareness. And Matt and I, and you guys have chatted about this on several expeditions about, what that actually means.
Yeah, great. No, I think that was great as well, Aldo. Don't do yourself a disservice. Um, all right, so I think you've listed a lot of the things that come to mind when I think of masculinity, and especially the phrase positive masculinity. I see, Matt, you shook your head a little bit then, because
that was a nod of agreement.
Okay, yeah. But, why do we need to have the phrase positive masculinity? Because it's kind of suggests that as a default, maybe masculinity is not positive, right? We don't have the phrase positive femininity. So what's going on there? Why is it that masculinity has a kind of bad rep at the moment? And how do we kind of claim back a sense of masculinity that isn't associated with, this more toxic side? But then also the other option is to, I think, which is what we maybe have done the last few years, is to actually ignore masculinity as a thing altogether, just in the way that we sort of do with femininity. And I think that that's actually left a lot of young boys without kind of a sense of self, a sense of identity, maybe a sense of meaning. So I just want to know, I guess my question is really is this an actual important concept, or is this something that we should probably just be doing away with? And if it is important, how do we make it positive? Maybe Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly important. I think masculinity is as important as femininity. If we start to remove these kind of identity markers, whether Aldo and I have had very different journeys with this, and maybe we'll come on to that, but Aldo's never thought about his masculinity. I consciously built something because I needed it, because I was so insecure as a teenager. I need my masculinity. I refuse to let somebody take it away from me. And I think this idea of toxic masculinity, we this phrase is a buzzword. It's almost like there's no space between them now. But masculinity and toxicity should be mutually exclusive. There's nothing inherently toxic about being a man. You mentioned masculinity is in vogue, and it is, in that we're having conversations about it, but they are not positive conversations. And for a long time, it has not been cool or trendy, and I would dare say even acceptable in some circles to be a man. I had a kind of fairly heated conversation with my wife over dinner one night, because she's really into this, both in terms of positive femininity, negative femininity, etc. And she said, and she was getting pretty upset, angry. And I was like, well, we just need to chill this out a little bit. And she said, the thing you don't get is, feminists, women, we're having our anger moment in the 5 stages of grief. And I'm sorry that that's impacting you in the way that it is. But me and my friends were having our anger moment. We're having our fuck you moment. And that's not fair, and it's not right. But it is what's happening. And I think this whole, I'm surprised that people are surprised that there's a radical male movement going on, the incel culture, Andrew Tate culture. I don't get why that's surprising. When you take a group of people and tell them that their existence is unacceptable, unpalatable, undesired, they're going to band together to form a community. And what they do is they form a community in antithesis to the people who are oppressing them. I'm not saying men are oppressed, right? And we could and maybe should come on to that, because I think some men are very oppressed. 16-year-old boys in council estates in Newcastle, that's oppression. I'm all good. I'm a very middle-class man living in the south of England. I'm not oppressed. But I think we need to rethink about how we're speaking to men in general. Some men are toxic. And, there are some very toxic men on the planet. That's unacceptable. It's serving nobody. But I just want to point out that these men were raised by parents, they were raised by society, and they were raised by friends. And we get to have a say in how the next generation view their masculinity, their femininity. My final point, and I'll stop talking, is I want to put a little flag in this conversation for toxic femininity, because we're not here to talk about femininity. But I think that there are toxic people and there are good people, and there's a spectrum of everybody in between. It's very, very complicated.
Yeah. I actually do not know what I would consider toxic femininity to look like, other than kind of aggression towards men. And I guess that's the extreme of toxic masculinity, isn't it? Is aggression towards women. I would just add to what you said there. I agree with it on the most part, is that I really don't like it when people think that to raise men up or to start to listen to men is just for the benefit of men. It seems so dumb to me, because it's like a group of disenfranchised, angry men is the worst thing ever for women. Like, because that's really who pays the price, I think, long term. It's the mums and, the daughters and the people who have to have relationships with men who, become toxic or become violent or get swayed by a lot of these bad ideas. Angry men are not good for anyone. So just wanted to say that point, because even if you're kind of like, I don't really have the emotional space to care about men, which a lot of women don't, and in some cases it's fair enough, I think, because of some of the things that women have experienced. But even if you don't have the emotional space for it, you really should care about this issue. Aldo, jump in.
Yeah, I think that this is such a huge topic, and it goes everything from socioeconomic, like Matt mentioned there, about if you're brought up in a council estate, like I was when I was younger. The society itself has changed. Introduction of smartphones, social media, high-speed internet connection means that already boys are falling behind. We're talking about men here. Men come from boys. Boys are falling behind academically, categorically behind women. That is a fact across almost all of the world that is educating their children. A failure to launch, essentially, is what it's called. And it's men, boys who the education system not necessarily set up to be able to teach boys in the way that it doesn't cater for their learning styles, for example, and a lack of positive male role models in those environments. If you look at a young boy who's brought up in a broken home, potentially at the age of 12, he's running the household as the man, and then comes to school and he's being taught, for example, by a female teacher. That young lad has no male influence in his life at any point. He becomes that person. Now, I'm not qualified in any of this other than my own opinion, but the failure to launch and boys academically falling behind means that most women are doing well and are generally better at boys at most things. That's generally it. They don't get given the space to be one of the best climbers in the world or one of the best whatever in the world, because generally that's the way it's always been. But now women are excelling in almost everything, and the things that made us traditionally male and masculine during the era where let's say men were going to the factory to work, those skills and the ability to have brawn over brain is now obsolete. Being a big strong guy now is obsolete. You don't need to go and lift and move heavy things. In fact, the men with the softest hands and the hunchbacks that are sat over their computers all day are now making more money than anyone else. And in the world that we live in now, money is seen as one of the top things that someone can have. So all of the things that once made us male in the industrial era are gone, and we're falling behind in school. So you then have a bunch of disenfranchised people, men, that are falling behind, that can't actually get themselves up on the ladder in the first place, and not in education or further training. They then lock themselves into their bedrooms with high-speed internet connections, smartphone, and social media. So there's this real shift from the real world into the virtual world, which leads to a decline in face-to-face relationships. It also, like Matt said, bunches people together. There's obviously a huge amount of people young men on porn and video games, which, the stats out there are basically saying that it's bad, but it's not all that bad. But actually what's worse from it is the decreased motivation, social isolation, and basically they can't have relationships anymore. So they're not going out to meet anyone. They're already falling behind. And then there's all of the stuff that we know now is happening with all kids. There's a lack of risk-taking activities. So they're not developing all these skills around resilience, relationship building, risky play. And then finally, it's, emotional disconnection. And that disconnection is the most dangerous. You've seen it. If two countries are in a silo, they go to war. Two people go in a silo, different views, they go to war. So I think, the failure to launch for boys is real. They're falling behind academically. What do? And all of the things that made us traditionally male are maladaptive now. They don't work. Being strong and, aesthetically, yes, but, you don't need to be strong to be a coder. You don't need to be strong to be trading. You don't need to be a big, strong man to be making money anywhere.
Yeah, totally. And just for the people out there who are kind of like, but all of wealth is retained among men. We don't have to look too far to find stats that show that women are still being left behind in many areas. Yep. I would say though that like people often look to like the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks and like the few men at the top who do own most of the world's wealth. But what we're talking about here is everyone else, and the people who are being left behind, in many cases are men right now. Another thing that I guess you both touched on a tiny bit is like the male mental health issue, which is something quite personal to me because I feel like all the sort of important men in my life have struggled much more with their mental health than the women in my life. And I kind of have struggled more, full stop, is what I would say. Not to kind of sound mean, but that's my personal experience. And I think a lot of that is to do with the stereotypes around reaching out for help, emotional intelligence. And then also what Aldo's saying about boys are slower than women, like they develop their prefrontal cortex later. It takes them a lot longer to have the same emotional intelligence as women, which also then causes a disconnect. And so, but then I think the main thing is that men don't feel comfortable talking about their emotions to the same extent that women do. And that has a cost in terms of mental health. So I just wanted for you both to kind of touch on just like mental health specifically. Matt, do you want to go?
Well, yeah, I need to keep this one succinct because you both know my past, but there's a lot to comment on there. I mean, one thing I do want to say as well, slightly tangential, but something you said before, the patriarchy, let's use that word. Caitlin Moran, who's like thought-leading feminist, written amazing books. She wrote the book What About Men? And she said she'd been waiting 20 years for a man to write it. They didn't, so she wrote it. Unbelievable piece of writing. Not really designed for me, designed for somebody or a man who isn't thinking about this stuff at all. And she said the patriarchy affects men, most men, as much as it affects women. And it's really interesting thought to unpack that. It absolutely affects women. It's horrendous. Some men are very bad, but it also really affects men. And I think this idea of, how men are raised, how boys are raised, is one of the most significant things I think we could talk about today, because I'm in a place these days where I can say I used to be a pretty toxic man in certain ways. I've never been physically, toxic, anything like that. But some of my behaviors, I was quite angry, quite like aggressive, assertive with my anger, probably in some ways a little controlling without realizing. I've had a lot of therapy, and I grew up in a world where that was how men behaved. That was my normal. I didn't know any different. I didn't think I was a bad man. I thought I was a really good man. Big boys don't cry. Big boys get on with it. I'll scrape my knee. Well, I'll get back up. I've not got feelings. Like, what are you on about? I don't have feelings. I'm a man.
And I just insert one thought into there. I think that's where the phrase toxic masculinity comes from. It comes from this it's something that's hard to point to. It's not, if it is, you're not talking about violent men, criminals, people like that, but we're talking about a way that men have been. Oh, is Matt's frozen? Oh, you're back. Sorry, you froze. Did you hear that?
Yeah, my internet cut there. Yeah, no, I got it. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of behavior that women, I guess, have picked up on. And because we don't want to gaslight people, I think, when we're talking about these phrases, because I think they've come from something, haven't they? It's just much more complex. It's much more nuanced. And why do we keep asking men to change when when we talk about problems with masculinity, it's always the responsibilities on the individual man to change, right? We don't talk about kind of the issue, the things that we could do as women, or the things that we could do structurally in society. So yeah, anyway, I just thought I'd insert that.
I think you made a really good point earlier, which is lots of women don't have the energy to want to change this stuff, or why me? Why should I have to? I'm not the problem. You probably aren't the problem, and you don't have to have the energy. But there are, like most things in life, some extremely simple steps that you could take that would make a fundamental difference to the men in your life. And I think what you just said there, it's not, don't expect men to change, give men permission to change. What changed my life was being in a relationship with a woman who let me suddenly learn to be vulnerable and to sit there and cry. And it was actually around the time my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, where I wanted to be a bit sad and cry sometimes. And, my wife says things to me now like, are you angry, or do you feel shame, or do you feel guilt? I'm like, yeah, I feel guilty. Oh, fuck, I do, don't I? And like, I'm still learning. I'm 7 years in post therapy now, but it's once I got permission to be able to be this thing, to feel these things, to learn that men are capable of negative emotions that aren't just anger and rage. I was given this toolkit to be able to live my life. And guess who's been affected by that positively? Practically everyone close to me, but especially me. My life is so much better now that I'm this man, but so is my wife's life.
Yeah. Just to describe that in a slightly different way, what you've said there is that, and this is what I've observed, is that in some ways we teach men that the only emotion that they can feel without being judged as effeminate or not manly is anger. Yet that's exactly the emotion that we also don't allow them to feel, right? Because an angry man is someone that no one wants around. So I think that's the kind of the hard place that a lot of young boys are in.
I think the other thing, to add into that is that we are in a position now where there's probably a pendulum swing. We have to remember that the media and social media blow all of this stuff out of proportion in lots of ways. And we can always find the thing that annoys us the most if we dig deep enough and get into the wormholes. So, like, taking a step back and seeing, actually, I said this to Anna quite a lot, because Anna is, Anna, my wife, and she can basically be saying that toxic masculinity is everywhere and it's all around, and all of this stuff is compressing on us. So actually, I'd say we'll look at the men that we know around here, like it's not generally the case. It is still out there, but the media blows a lot of it out of proportion, and we all just jump on whatever the bandwagon is at that time. But the conversation needs to be happening. We're in a position now where we can be a circuit breaker. We're having the conversations. I'll be honest, was limited to about 3 emotions up until about 4 years ago. And as my young lad Atlas has been growing up, I'm like, I need to develop my emotional intelligence, because I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, I've had maybe 6 friends that I know as well or better than you guys, and I've been on expeditions with you, that have killed themselves. Now, these are big, tough, strong alpha male types that people would say, well, I never saw that coming. But actually, if you've only got 3 words to describe how you're feeling in that moment, then it's if you're not having the vocabulary to talk about those emotions, then it's quite likely that you don't recognize when that's happening, or understand, or able to label that emotion to deal with it acceptably in your environment, country, whatever that is. And actually regulate your nervous system, brain, everything to that emotion. Yes, feel angry, but have a way of dealing with it. Yes, feel sad. But to add into that, so I then went and bought this little bad boy off of one of the online shops. And it's
old
basically
school. It's actually in paper.
It's a magnet. It's a magnet.
Oh,
so
it's a magnet. Nice, cool.
This sticks onto Atlas's bed, and I've got one in the gym, and it's basically an emotion wheel. Now, the reason I was talking about this is if you don't have the vocabulary to talk about how you feel, then it's very likely that you don't know how to regulate those emotions. And like I say, 6 mates at least have killed themselves who I've been at war with or doing big things with. So they're like, on the outside of it, they're, masculine, and yet they don't, for whatever reason, they weren't able to sort of process and deal with things. And I just think a vocabulary around that. So anyway, Atlas and I sit and do this every night before bed, and we talk about emotions and we do gratitude, right? These are really simple. It's free. I'm learning as we go, because like Matt said, before I would have been like, well, I'm angry, but actually I'm not. I'm guilty, or I'm frustrated because I can't do blah, blah, blah. And actually, as much as it's for Atlas, we're in this circuit breaker position where we can teach our boys how to deal with emotions, that these things are there and they can have a big impact on your life. And like you say, up until 26, really, our prefrontal cortexes aren't developed, and yet we can drive cars, we can go to the pub, we can get angry, and we can react to a situation, and we've not got all the bits of our thinking process in there to make a good decision in the moment. So anyway, that was just a little one, that I think the circuit breaker part of being able to, and not just for boys, for girls as well, they're better, young girls are better at saying how they feel and what affects them. But, like with Atlas, my sister died in November. My little sister died just 6 months ago. And Atlas saw me crying, and he asked what was wrong, and I told him what was wrong, and that I was sad, and that that I would miss my sister, and we did this whole thing over the period of like 2 months while we were all going through the grieving process, and he saw it, and we let him see it, because I can still go and climb a mountain, I can still go and dive in a submarine, and I can still go and do some really cool shit, and I can still cry when I'm sad, and I can be happy when it's the end part, crying, laughing. These are all the regulation part of a nervous system to deal with the emotion. And if you're not doing it, what happens?
Can I build on that a little bit as well? I think, we're all parents, we're all young parents, and we should probably avoid the parent chat today. But I just completely agree with what you're saying. Like, I think becoming a parent, you sort of get to choose. Am I going to just muddle through this? Or am I going to circuit break? Am I going to break the chain on stuff? And Aldo, we've talked a lot on trips, but we come from different worlds, but we had similar upbringings in terms of, I think, what we were taught as men, but subconsciously by others. And I now, with my kids, the biggest thing is I apologize to them. I don't think I ever heard my dad say sorry. You know, he's dead now, but I don't think I ever heard him apologize to me. I say sorry to my kids multiple times a day because I get it wrong, particularly if I get grumpy or if I raise my voice. And I just that instant apology, and it's become so easy for me now. It was such an effort at the start. But also the other thing is like if Katie and I have any slightly elevated words or heated words and the kids were present, which we try and avoid at all costs, I make a point or she makes a point, because we both do it, of apologizing to each other in front of the kids. And I think what we're teaching them there is not that like mummy and daddy have this perfect world relationship. We're teaching them that sometimes people get things wrong and actually you have to deal with that. And the way that you can deal with that is X, Y, Z, A, B, C. But sometimes it's as simple as saying, mummy, I'm sorry that I got a bit grumpy earlier. I was feeling a bit stressed because of work and I think I need some more sleep, but I'm sorry, I shouldn't have taken it out on you. That simple line has completely changed how my children approach their emotions.
That's great.
Yeah, agreed.
So I want to bring this back to sort of the world of outdoors. And what I'm interested to hear from both of you is, you know, you're both in very male dominated spaces, really, you know, especially you, Aldo, you know, you've come, is it Special Forces? I always get it wrong.
Marines.
Marines. Sorry. I like something to do
He
with
wishes.
the military.
Yeah.
I
Just
honestly
the
don't
armor.
really know. Yeah, I mean, I'm really ignorant to all that stuff. But, you know, the Marines, and then, you know, you do a lot of expeditions in teams that are usually always male dominated, right? I imagine that most of your social media following are men. I think most of the people who look up to you are men. It's a very kind of macho world. I mean, Matt, you're in that space as well. Expeditions, TV, all of that. And I think just people who are listening to this who may be more in the climbing world, which has become much more gender balanced, really. You know, you walk into any climbing gym and it's, you know, it can even be more women in there, right? You guys are still operating in pretty male dominated worlds. And I'm curious, like, does that kind of macho-y sort of scene, does that kind of help to perpetuate some of these, I don't want to say toxic masculinity, I don't think we need to use that word anymore, but some of these issues, let's say, that men have struggled with around like emotional intelligence, for example, or, you know, being confident and secure enough to cry in front of their children, or to you know, be vulnerable, to reach out for help when they maybe feel depressed instead of just bottling it all up. Like, what's the scene like? Is it perpetuating this stuff, or is it actually potentially a remedy?
I think that men, and I'm speaking from myself, I think men do need to spend time with men doing things that is play. So if you look at like the different areas of your life, you've got your health. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. And then you've got work, and then you've got love and play equally, right? I think it's very useful for men to go out and let off steam with other men. I'm speaking for myself, so I'll go out mountain biking or climbing with other blokes where I can talk. I would say 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been having the conversations that I'm having now with people. I just had a conversation with a mate last night who basically told me he wasn't all right and that he was struggling. That would have never happened 20 years ago, and I wouldn't have had the capacity to know what to do either 20 years ago. So I would say in the line of work that I am, and also I would say that I'm a work in progress, but I certainly am not emotionally stunted. So, I recognize if someone isn't right, and I will have the conversation. I will ask, I'll make a point of speaking to that person and asking the questions. Maybe 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. It certainly wouldn't have been the case in the Marines at all. I think that is also changing. But yes, when men get together, they're certainly going to be doing silly things, right? But boys, especially young boys at 16, it's egging each other on. But this is all part of risk-taking behavior, which we've essentially, modern parenting has absolutely kiboshed out of every single kid's life. Since the invention of smartphones, social media, and high-speed internet connection, the rate of young boys and girls with broken limbs has absolutely plummeted because they're not going out, they're not in play parks, they're not on skateboards, they're not on on BMXs at the weekend. They're sat in front of a screen in their bedroom where it's super safe. You might argue it's not.
It's not.
Exactly. But for me personally, as a man, I love being out with men to talk about the things that are stressful, and ultimately, if you look at as a positive male role model, masculine male role model, the most resilient behavior you could ever display is to be able to ask for help when you're struggling, and it's sometimes going out with other blokes, realizing that everyone's in their struggle, everyone's doing their things, and just chatting about it. But I think from my point of view, going outdoors is the remedy for almost everything. Moving your body, getting outside with mates, whether it's climbing, whatever, not just men, but everyone.
Yeah. I think if Aldo wasn't here, I'd have said something very similar. So I won't repeat it. I think I'll speak to the other side, which is the industries that we work in are still dominated by men in terms of the numbers. And is that an issue? Yeah. Would I like to see that change? Yeah. Do I think it's simple? No. Of course, it's about actual access and visibility. And is it easy for women to get into these spaces? Are young girls inspired to follow these careers? It starts at young age. I had Leo Holding to look up to. I wanted to do what he did.
There's no female Bear Grylls, right? There's female Leo Holdings now,
Yeah.
But Barbara Zangill's probably the obvious person.
But we're getting there, and this is
in the outdoor space. I don't know if there is one, right?
No, and that, Aldo, maybe you can speak to this too, but now that I've got a lot more telly experience and I'm actually working with exec producers on commissions now, it's a business. And so there currently isn't the market for a show that targets young girls about Bear Grylls-y adventure. They're not in terms of profit. And so would I love to see that for my daughter to watch? Hell yeah. But because I'm so exposed to this world, I can show my daughter she's seen you do stuff with me on telly. But it is about market. And I think it's the same as the footballer conversation. Why is the pay gap so different? Well, because lots of men watch men play football. It's shit that it's true, but it is true. And I think we sometimes rose tint all this stuff and we like to just shout about it and get cross about it. But there are actual practical realities to why things are the way they are. And if we want to see them shift and change, which I do, that's going to take effort from lots of different people of, both men and women, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to get too into the sort of the, I think gender equality in the outdoors is probably, it's connected, but it is a different conversation, I think. And I kind of wanted to focus this more on men.
Well, that's good because that's easier and less likely to get me cancelled.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think you could get cancelled for what's inside your head, but maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that there's things about sort of this manly outdoor adventure space that you want to keep, but there's things you also want to change. So Aldo's kind of listed some of those things. You want to have some spaces that are still male dominated, and that's something that's hard to say, right? We have all of these events now and protected spaces for women and other minorities. There's no protected spaces for men. But that's something that we don't really need to care about as much in the areas that you are. But I think it's just worth noting. And for example, I don't know, in my local area, men's groups are a thing. where men get together and support each other. My husband is part of one. And it does seem like male-only space does in some sense need to be part of the conversation for some men, because I think that what I've seen happen personally is that when men don't know how to ask for help or don't know how to process their emotions, they turn to the women in their lives and they become hyper reliant on those women, which is a burden to those women a lot of the times. And then as soon as you sort of throw kids and pregnancy and everything into the equation, that woman can't do that job anymore. And yeah, there's lots of problems with just being reliant
on my house.
Yeah, so there's lots of problems with just being reliant on few people anyway. And then also, especially when you don't have a trusted partner, which, you know, we're all in the position that we are, but lots of men are single, or lots of men look to the women that they date to fulfill this role when they aren't ready to fulfill that role yet, because there's not that trust there. So men do need to look to men, I think, and that's what I've seen. But we also don't want to just. It also feels like when we leave men to it too much on their own, also bad things happen, right?
Well, I think there's probably a distinction to be made between what's happening in the world online and what's happening outside in the real world, because socially disconnected kids, for example, young boys at 15, 16 that are disconnected from the real world because they're so connected virtually, that emotional disconnection, feelings of meaningless and basically like, where are they going with their life? They're not worthy. That leads to a huge increase in anxiety and depression in the young. They're inward looking now instead of outward looking. And then that, from what I understand, then allows these sort of echo chambers, which ultimately become negative, right? The human brain, as you know, Hazel, is at best neutral. And if you leave it to its own devices without taking positive steps every single day, is negative. And so those echo chambers ultimately become negative echo chambers. Whereas getting outside in a male group, which I think is important, go mountain biking, climbing, like we're talking about the outdoors here. And it's not only the connection, face-to-face connection, but you're also connecting with the environment. You're also moving your body. So problems can often be worked out by moving your body. We're now in one of the biggest epidemics really in the world of burnout and overwhelm. So like exhaustion, cynicism, ineffectiveness, these feelings, these are making not just men, but everyone drop out. And the big antidote to that we all know is getting outside with a group of people. It doesn't have to be men, but I find it enjoyable being out with men, mountain biking, climbing, whatever. I also do the same in mixed groups. But I just think there's a huge amount of good that can happen when people meet face to face outside, like you said, the men's groups. It's just the negative echo chambers, which is usually, in my experience, associated with being online, because it's easy to hide and it's easy to be anonymous. And it's a short step, to becoming part of these groups.
And the algorithms are designed to take any tiny grievance, right, and completely magnify it. I read some horrible stat that Andrew Tate was the third most Googled name in 2023.
That's the whole thing, right? Is that the media, right? I haven't watched the news in 25 years at all. I don't read it, and it means that I'm out of conversation. If someone's talking about something that's political, I don't have much to say about it. But I tell you, I'm happier for it.
Yeah.
But the media sells all of its media based on our heuristics of finding negative things either enjoyable from a Schadenfreude point of view, or because it might it might be helpful for us to, for us to survive. So our brains are programmed to pick up on negative stuff, and then we start giving light and airspace to that, the negative side of it. Whereas I'm much more from the side of it is that what we need is positive male role models from early on that are emotionally intelligent, capable, and are able to impact in a good way. They're flourishing in their life and they're able to help other boys and girls, essentially everyone, flourish. But people, essentially that doesn't sell.
I want to ask you though, because you've spoken negatively about the online space, but you're in the online space. You have a following, right? And I see you. I don't know if try is the right word, but you are occupying a space as a positive male role model because you tick a lot of the boxes around what's classically manly, right? But you're also starting to talk about things in positive ways. Matt's nodding, shaking his head here, but how do you sort of like?
I'm deeply conflicted.
Yeah. How do you manage
that? Because ultimately, I have an online presence. I've never pushed for it, but now that I have it, it's modest, but I have to be incredibly careful what I say and what I do on it. And also, I don't want to be on it because I know how destructive it is. I'll give you an example. If I have to post something or I want to post something, I post it and I don't doom scroll. I'm not sat on there. But also for us, it's manageable because our prefrontal cortex has developed. I went through puberty and sensitive period without it. So I developed social interaction skills that, I can work out what's right and what's wrong. I think social media is a big problem. If you're not mentally, emotionally, and physically mature, and I'm talking about puberty, a sensitive period. If you're, this is especially damaging for young girls. But to be comparing yourself at the age of 13 with the rest of the world is deeply traumatic. If I was a kid at school, I just had to, see if I could outbench the other people in my PE class. Whereas, now if you're 13 at school, you're like literally up against some little guy that's, a genetic freak in whatever part of the world that his dad's been making him do bench press all his life. And, you're now in comparison with this guy. So I'm deeply conflicted. I want off it. I've binned it all off my phone. I have to access it specifically to then go in to then do the poster to do something like that. But yeah, like if I could be off it now, I'd be off it. In fact, when I come back from a trip, it's always a good litmus test. When I come back from a trip and I've not been on it, and I look at my own feed, I'm partially disgusted. I'm like, why does people need to see me doing gym with my top off? Or why do I need to be posting like leadership tips for people? Like, and it kind of, it's a bit icky.
Can I come in on that? Because not anymore, but I used to be that guy who needed you. So I needed to see you saying, I am this, brave, strong, tough, but I'm also vulnerable, careful, apologetic, and like seeing people like, I'm not going to be too nice to you, and I don't do very often, but I think it's helpful. And I think when I look at this stuff, I kind of, because there is huge, I know you won't mind me saying this, there's huge hypocrisy to it. You've deleted it off your phone, but you are one of the people who are pushing for it online. I'm the same, very similar. I've got a much smaller following, but I think you're probably adding more to people's lives than you're taking away. And you're not responsible for whether or not people choose to access stuff. And I'd rather they were looking at your stuff than so-and-so influencer who,
But I think, ultimately I'm deeply conflicted by it, but that's why I try to curate stuff that's positive, that has an impact, that's not just unattainable or, even just tips. I don't know. Yeah, I like it. I'm so deeply conflicted by social media that it annoys me when I do have to post, say, for a a brand that I work with, we all work with brands, and that's part of what you have to do is it takes me such a long time to do it because I need to make sure that it's right and it's not going to have a negative impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it also, the most positive or the most engaged posts I've ever done on social media are the ones where I've been vulnerable or I've been wrong or I've opened myself up to something. And it took a long time to kind of be brave enough to do that. But I think it just kind of evidences this point. And I sometimes look at the stats and see how many men are liking that stuff. And if they always DM me, they don't comment because they can't be seen to be, but I think the point I'd like to make is most men are very insecure and they don't want you to know that. Women of this world, they don't want you to, they can't let you know that. It's not possible. And it's a really, really big bridge to try and cross, this idea that if you actually let people know you are insecure, you will become less insecure. It's kind of that simple. It does work like that. But I think, relating this to the outdoor world, we hear a lot about what's the word, like not body dysmorphia, but eating disorders, etc. Like all this stuff is really important. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're much more across this than me, Hazel, but usually that stuff is talked about in kind of the female context. I think that men suffer just as much. I'm really insecure physically. I want to look like Aldo, and I have all my excuses and I can list them all off, but I don't. I'm really insecure physically. I'm wearing a hat now because I hate being bald. Most of us are really insecure too. And I think being given the permission by others and by ourselves to be a bit more insecure and work on the things that we're insecure about, it transforms you. It changes you.
Do you think that online space is a good place to do that?
I think I agree with Aldo. I think it depends on your headspace. So I think if you're arriving in a negative spiral, it's probably just going to continue that downward spiral. If you're arriving from a place of seeking inspiration or online distance mentorship, you're not actually a mentor, but you're liking what Aldo writes online, you read his book and that works for you, or pick anybody else, then I think that can go well. I'd say it's helped me more than it's hindered me.
And the responsibilities with the user, though?
I will die on that hill. I think the responsibilities with the user, with the exception of children, the responsibility isn't with Aldo or the other influencers. I personally am of the opinion that children shouldn't have social media, but that's a bigger topic for another day.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so I want to ask you both now, because you both have had your struggles, it sounds like, and you've been on kind of like a journey, which we could unpick a little more if that's what comes up here. But I also am mindful that some men might be listening to this who, are just finding it really hard to be vulnerable, or they feel really alone, or they know they're insecure, but they don't know what to do about it. Or, they're just struggling, and they're struggling silently. And whether they're into the outdoors or not, we've obviously heard a lot from Aldo that just being outside, exercising. I think exercise is one of the most proven successful interventions for almost any mental health ailment, right? It just helps. So we're pretty hot on that side of things. But what advice would you give to someone who's struggling?
I would say you need to get this isn't just for men, this is for everyone. You need to get your basics right. So you need, if you think about your body budget, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not putting the right fuel in, and you're not exercising and moving your body, then you're already operating, in deficit or overdrawn. You cannot be creative if you're stressed. You can't make good decisions if you're stressed, or you're not dealing with what life is throwing at you. So the bottom of it all of about being a resilient person is about sleep, exercise, and nutrition. Resilience, or being resilient, because life throws shit at you all the time, and how you deal with that really does matter. So first of all, get all your basics right. If you're getting those right, you can actually deal with things in context a little bit, I guess, better, easier. And then optimism. confidence in coping, and your ability to assess a challenge. So that means like not awfulizing or catastrophizing every time something happens. So getting all those basics right, done and dusted. And then, ultimately it's about finding your curiosity, passion, purpose, whatever that thing is. We've all found it. If you don't have that, and also people don't have autonomy and mastery, right? So you're doing a job you hate. You're not able to spend time on the things that matter for flourishing. In life, if you're not flourishing, then you're going to be spiraling in a negative spiral. And if that's online, that's even worse. So positive emotions, gratitude, compassion, forgiveness, right? These are all free. I've been doing it for a couple of years now. It's made a massive difference. Engagement and flow, we talked about it earlier on with like play. Hazel does it, Matt does it, I do it at work, or when we're going out climbing, or we find a thing that's play that puts us in a creative, playful mode, like mountain biking for me, right? And that engagement that comes from that last 2 or 3 days, the positive effect from it. And then positive relationships. It's like well known that the biggest predictor of longevity and good health is the amount of good quality relationships that you have and nurture. Now, if you look at what we've just said over the last hour, that's not happening. People aren't meeting face to face anymore. We don't even meet our neighbors. And then finding the last ones, I guess, is like finding meaning in what you're doing. If you can't find meaning in what you're doing on a daily basis, your mental health isn't going to be that great. And also, if you're not achieving anything, and I'm not talking about like entrepreneurial like achievements and all the rest of it. I just mean what's important to you. If you're not achieving that, then again, all of this is you're not flourishing. And to be a good man, to be masculine, to be a good female, a woman, we're all leaders at some extent in our lives. We're someone looks up to us somewhere. And if we're not flourishing and doing all the basics right, then I think, it's a downward spiral. Our brains are pretty much focused on negative and negativity. We need to be working daily on doing things that are productive. So I think, that's my basics. It's not really just for men. It's probably for everyone.
Anything specific in there, Aldo, for men?
Yeah. So for men specifically who are struggling to, I guess, to engage with this, it's well known that one of the biggest killers of men under 50 is suicide, right? Why is that happening? It's a conversation for another time. It's a huge subject. But I would say that what men need to do is, first of all, talk, open up, find someone that they can talk to. I think it's often confused that being vulnerable is a weakness. And from my point of view, vulnerable is a strength. I said it earlier on. Asking for help is one of the most resilient behaviors that anyone can display, and especially important when we've got kids, right? So I guess I would say, I would want to speak to someone. Who can I speak to? Get involved in something that gets me outside and moving. Get in a group that goes and does these things. But also, mental health, can be negative. Mental health can be a chemical issue. It's not just that someone's feeling down. It can be a complete chemical imbalance that requires medical intervention. So, it's putting all of these things together. But first of all, it's understanding I don't feel right. It could be like testosterone. TRT is a massive thing now that's happening with men. I know 6 or 7 blokes that are doing TRT, which then increases their mood. I guess it's so it's like hormones, chemical imbalances, not having meaning in their life. But first of all, I guess it's about understanding and that's an issue, and potentially looking at any behaviors that you're doing that are negative. How much time are you spending on the computer at night on your own in your bedroom? If it's more than about 10 minutes, I would venture to suggest that's probably a bit too much. And then get outside and find something, passion, purpose.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Aldo.
Yeah, and I mean, I could do 2-hour talk on this, so I'll try and keep it lean. But to kind of build on what Aldo said, and then I'm going to be vulnerable, in a to evidence the point. I don't know how many people listen to this, but I don't care anymore. Like, it doesn't affect me in the way that it used to. I'm cool with this because vulnerability is quite cool. And I think that we're only just realizing that as men. Like, most of the men I know, the ones who, and you know them too, who hide behind their alpha masculinity, I can see straight through that. I can just see it. And I wish they weren't like that. I want to help them. The vulnerability that we show, I think, is so much braver than any mountain we've climbed. And a few friends have said that to me. Like, it takes so much more bravery. And I just respect it. I think it's cool. But I want to speak a bit more to the kind of the darker or deeper side of men and mental health. And I think that women are naturally much better at being vulnerable generally. It's all a bell curve, obviously. Some women are probably awful at it, but generally that's the case. Some men need proper help. And I think you can start by asking a friend. And it can be as simple as, hey, can we have a chat? Or hey, can we go for a pint? And just like experiment with a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of honesty. Like, I'm just feeling a bit run down at the minute. I'm not sure what's going on. You don't need to tell us your life story. It happens to me a lot on the internet now. I get lots of people reaching out to me, which is difficult. And that's a different topic. But I needed therapy, and I was so messed up. And this is going to go deep, so sorry. But I don't know if I've ever told you guys this, but I had a massive mental health breakdown in my late 20s that needed full-scale intervention. Booked myself in to see a psychiatrist. I thought I had some form of major disorder. And he said to me after a 2-hour consultation, I said, am I a psychopath? Was the words I said to him after 2 hours. And he leant forwards and he looked at me across the table and he said, do you know what your problem is, Matthew? You've got no idea who you are. And I just burst into tears. And off the back of that, I started having a really specific form of therapy, which was what I needed. Might not be what everyone needed, called cognitive analytic therapy. I did 3 months, and the therapist, she was this sensational, like, potty mouthed northern woman. It's exactly what I needed. She dropped the C-bomb a lot, which I had a lot of time for. And I felt like I dropped from 1 to 0, and she brought me back to 1. And after 3 months, she said, I think you might be done and we can look at the exit strategy. And I was like, yeah, but what happens if I stay? Like, what's 10? I've never experienced 10 before. So I did 9 months in the end. And, the point of this ramble is the bravest thing I ever did was go to therapy. And the second bravest thing I ever did was keep going, because I think lots of people go for one session and just didn't work. Well, that's not how this works. That's like saying you went to the gym once and you didn't get jacked. Like, therapy is the same as the gym. It's the gym for your brain. Call it therapy, call it counseling, call it mentorship, call it growth, whatever you want, however you want to brand it. But it is the same as the gym for your body. And this stigma around men going to therapy, thank God it's starting to change. But I won't go into this today. I'd be happy to, but I don't think it's relevant. But I'm telling you for a fact that therapy saved my life. I was nearly that person. That's how bad I was at the time. And so I think Aldo and I are approaching this from two sides, and they're both important. One is, here are things you can do if you need a bit of help. And what I'm trying to say is, sometimes you need professional help.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in it. Try it.
Yeah. I would, fully agree with that, because actually, full scale medical intervention is what is required in some cases. But I guess that comes down to, you might not recognize it, but your mates might. And that's also, like, as a mate to my friends, if I see something that's like that, then I will always address it head on with the person. I'll ask them if they're okay. I'll ask them if there's something that that I can help with, because sometimes people just want permission to speak. And I would say with men, that's quite a lot of the cases, that sometimes we're not going to initiate it because of all the preconceived ideas about weakness and all the rest of it. But we just need sometimes people just need given space to say, actually, you know what, I'm not all right. And then the other side of that is that we all need to be focusing on the positive aspects of mental health, of masculinity, of femininity, of what it is to be a human being. Like I said, all the aspects of flourishing, they need work every single day. And if you don't, the weeds will grow in. And when the weeds grow in, toxicity, people being in silos, war, ultimately, that's what happens.
Yeah. My one final point, and I'll stop, I promise, is we've all got different brains,
Yeah.
and you can't kind of change that sometimes. Like, I've always had big ups and downs, and there was talk of medication a long time ago, and I've never did it, and I don't need to. I honestly don't need to. I know that. But I see it as my brain has weather. And like, some days are amazing. They're sunny. It's time to go outside and do stuff. And those are my big creative days, or my big work days, or my extrovert days. And some days it's cloudy and it's stormy. And the best thing I can do is get lots of sleep, eat good food, bit of light exercise, maybe, watch an episode of telly, because I'm allowed to do that sometimes, and don't put pressure on myself to nail that day. And actually, like, I think we put people on pedestals and we see them as superhumans, and then we hate ourselves when we're not that person. And it's like, they're not that person either. You just think they are. That perception of I know Aldo better than most people on the internet who follow him. I'm telling you, he's not out chasing tigers around Asia every day, driving his, Lamborghini. That's not what Aldo's life is like.
Yeah.
That's the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think from what you guys said there, like, big takeaways here are, that you've really got to like work on yourself. It's like these things don't get handed to you. I think that's true if you're a man or you're a woman. But maybe the consequences of not working in yourself might be just a bit worse for men, because naturally maybe they don't have as many close friends, or they're not speaking up as much, or they feel like there's a stigma. I think it's something like 28% of women have received therapy in the UK in the past year, and 17% of men. So quite a big difference there. And like Matt said, it could be the thing that saves your life. Ideally, we don't, unless you've got a sort of actual mental health condition, if you're a otherwise healthy person, it's a preventative thing, right? It's and it has to be something that you choose day after day after day, just like we do with physical exercise. And I think letting that slip is massive. And I also just want to say that if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know if I really relate to this, like, I'm someone who really like works on myself. I think that I'm able to be vulnerable. But when my dad died and I was really struggling, it all of a sudden became much harder, so it's like you've got to do the groundwork when you've got the small problems, because a really big problem comes along and you won't be ready for it. And that's what resilience is, right? Which is classically a masculine trait. So that's the sort of the advice to men. What about female counterparts? You did mention there, like, that I want to also bring attention to is that if you are doing well as a man, maybe that's your moment to take a leadership mentor role with the people in your community and be more mindful of what they're going through. Because it's very easy when you're having a great time to just be like, everything's great, and not notice that like your friend is actually kind of sad, or you've not heard from someone for a month or whatever. So I think that's just an important reminder there, that if you want to show up and be a more positive male, it might look like looking after people more. So there's that aspect as well. But then there's also what do the other people, especially the women in lives of men, what could they do to make this kind of narrative around masculinity more helpful, more healthy, more productive?
Oh God.
I mean, you mentioned something already, Matt, about giving men permission, because I think that is something that, and this is like, it's a bit hard to say this, but there is a thing, isn't there, where women want men to be emotionally intelligent, but then when they show their emotions, it freaks them out. And it's probably because we've not seen it. I was lucky. Like my dad was someone who could cry in front of us. I think that was quite unusual for a man of his time, especially sort of coming from this macho climbing community, but he would cry in front of us. But what if you're a woman who's never seen a man cry, and then all of a sudden you're in a relationship with someone who's crying? So anyway, Matt, I'll let you run with that.
I mean, I'm nervous right now, right? Like, here we go. Here's my emotional intelligence. Like, I'm nervous about doing this because I don't feel qualified to comment because I'm not a woman, and I'm not scared of getting in trouble. I don't like getting in trouble online. I'm getting better at it, but I just think honesty is really powerful. And my wife is on one hand incredible at this stuff, and on the other hand, a fucking nightmare. And I'd say this if she was sat here, and she won't mind me saying it. She has her great days and she has her terrible days. In terms of what I need. And I learned that I need more than her. I was that guy after we had kids, and rebuilding friendships and relationships has been really important to me. But what can women do? We were really struggling after our second born, and my wife said, I feel like we've solved lots of our problems together, but there's some stuff we just can't get past. Do you want to go see a couples counselor? And I was like, my response was, yeah. Like, I've had really positive experience of therapy. We went for 10 weeks and we just stopped. We were like, I think we've done it, haven't we? That worked. Like, that was amazing. It just really helped us. But why it worked was Katie could hear what was going on with me, whereas I think in the past she really struggled with that. She didn't have the time. She's got 2 young kids. She's got a high-flying career. She's busy. She's tired. She doesn't want to sit and listen to me whinge. But actually, she needed to sit and listen to me
But
whinge.
would you
and
listen to her? Was there an imbalance there?
Yeah, there was. And I'd say I've had the more traditionally feminine role in that sense in our relationship. I love a deep chat. I run a podcast. I'm starting another, and I'm sat here with you. Katie less so, but I think for her, it was learning that she couldn't have this, big, brave, strong, big inverted commas there, but deeply emotionally available, emotionally intelligent man if she wasn't willing to enable him to exist. And that means sometimes she's going to get home from work at 11 o'clock because she works evenings. I'm still going to be awake, and I'm going to be like, I really need you. I need to just talk about this thing, or this shit thing happened at work, or I miss my dad, or whatever it might be. But try and make this more succinct. Be honest if you're struggling with their honesty. So actually, when Katie said to me, I want this from you, this is so much better, but actually it does make me kind of uncomfortable, and I realized that's my problem that I need to work on. I already knew that. I could see it like in her body language, but hearing her say it made me go, oh sweet, we're on this journey together. Like, this is cool. I've got some work to do, you've got some work to do, but we can do this together. And I could be like, of course this makes you uncomfortable. Like, I'm crying. That's weird. I don't cry. But yeah.
You do.
And also, I cry watching Disney movies now. Like, I'm a big drippy mess. But the other thing, just quickly, and I'll hand over to Aldo, and I'm really nervous about talking about this, but I think, some men are really, really bad, and women struggle because of men. Women feel unsafe because of men. I know lots of women who have been physically assaulted, let's use the word, by men. But whilst that's abhorrent, and we need to build a world where that isn't a thing anymore, we have to accept, if we're going to make progress, that most men aren't like that. And I get that you can't just treat all men as if they're safe, but we need to be able to nurture this kind of future masculinity together. It's not just on men to fix. If women aren't able or ready to give us permission to evolve and change, it can't happen. It won't work. It's growing plants without water. It's not possible.
It's a really good point, that, Matt, and I just want to draw attention to sort of like the practical side of okay, I'll say this in a really crass way, but like treating all men like potential criminals or rapists. I didn't think that was a thing until I spoke to my partner about it. And he works in the outdoor space. He might take kids groups, for example. he is so terrified of like ever being not alone with a young girl even, but like literally just stood off to the side, or like there's so much anxiety. He really feels that he is being viewed in this way, that, just like a potential bad actor basically, because he's a man, that like the default is that he could just be dangerous basically. And I was so unaware of that, literally had no awareness that that's what a really nice sensitive man might feel in the world. And like I read this also this stat that like that nursery and kindergarten teachers, only 2% of them are men.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly there's ramifications and consequences and a cost to kind of perceiving men as potentially dangerous, right? We don't want our kids alone with men. We don't want, we're very like high risk and cautious with these things. And there's going to be consequences to that I'm not aware of as well, but they're just some of the ones that come to mind.
The irony is that we now live in, I'm talking about here in the UK, we now live in one of the safest times that has ever been around. The media hypes everything up. So you think you're going to go out your front door, and you're going to be battered, mugged, raped. Yes, that happens. And when it does happen, it's blown out of proportion on so much social media, echo chambers, news on loop. But we actually live in the safest time. I haven't done it yet, but I could probably send Atlas round to the swing park now on his own, and nothing would happen to him. It's more likely that someone would come and get him and bring him back to me, or phone the police, or so we just, with everything, we need to just always take a pinch of like, what is the reality here and what's being pushed and peddled by the bad actors, social media, etc. So we are actually living outside in the real world in one of the safest times that we've ever had. We are now living in probably the most dangerous time that has ever existed for anyone online. And I'm talking about kids here, social media, and access to bad actors. So it's about perception. For me, it's about perception versus reality, and it's the same in our line of work in risk climbing. And assessing risk is like, what is actually the risk here, or the hazard here, and what's the likelihood of that happening? And I think we've got that totally muddled across the board with everything, because it's so it's so messed up with the amount of information that we can get. So I don't know where I'm trying to go with it, but essentially what I'm trying to say is that, we need, yes, there are bad actors out there, but the majority of people aren't, and the majority of people aren't. I have to watch what I'm saying. The majority of men, for example, that I know probably aren't what you would call toxic males. They probably need a bit of work, and they're not terribly sure about their own emotions and all of this sort of stuff. But I would say that they're probably not in that bracket.
They're good
but
people, we're mostly surrounded
people,
by good people.
Yeah, and I think ultimately what, it's probably just a thing for everyone, is to realize that everyone is struggling and everyone is important to someone else. And as soon as you realize that, it takes down that barrier straight away that makes you want to judge someone. And by judging someone, it's dangerous, because it means that you're making assumptions. I don't know where I'm going with it, but what I'm trying to say is that generally the majority of people that, for example, I know aren't like that. So it's about perception versus reality.
Yeah, to build on what Aldo is saying, and to go back to the question as well, like, what can women do? I think I learned a lot, or it's really helped me to understand that like women are in kind of the anger stage of grief when it comes to feminism. Like, I actually get that. That was a really helpful thing to hear, so that I don't get cross anymore when they go, fucking men, this and that. And I just go, oh, that makes sense. They don't mean I am an awful human being and I don't deserve to be here anymore, and they don't want me or need me. They're pissed off that their friend got grabbed on the arse while they were walking through Soho the other night. Like, that's not acceptable. But I think that's fair and that's valid. On the other side, I think if women were able to understand or like to have the energy to understand that so Aldo and I think we're both quite good men. We've probably got some work we could do, but we're sort of I'm sort of working out what that means now and how to behave, and certain things I would have done before that are maybe not acceptable now. Like, do I offer a woman a seat on the tube? Well, no, not anymore. Not unless she's pregnant or elderly. But sometimes women look at me like, are you going to get up or am I going to stand here? And I have done it before and I've been told off. But the other side of this is I was on the tube when I lived in London for a year, and there were three lads got on. They were leery, they were scary. I was a bit nervous of them, didn't know if they were carrying something. It was a bit scary, and it all started kicking off a little bit. And it was getting a bit much, and people were getting affected. And me and two other men stood up and we got involved. With nothing physical happened, but we basically squared up to them and we're just kind of like, you're getting off at the next stop or it's going to go somewhere. But it was three men who did that. And I was glad it was three men who did that. I wanted that to be the case. And I think I'm learning how to live in this world where I like being strong and rough, and I do know how to handle myself. And I've got experience of being in scraps with people. I'd rather that was me than Katie. There's no world where I want her to step into a fight instead of me. Is that toxic masculinity? I don't know. I'll leave that one as a rhetorical question. I don't think it is.
Well, yeah, no, I don't think it is either. And I think that maybe like the quick way of framing that is to say that feminism has been on such a journey, and it's very, very complex. And what that's done is it's made it confusing to be a man, I think, is kind of the sort of the short of it. And I think that we're all just trying to, and then also just, throw in sort of non-conforming genders and transgender and, all of those conversations which have kind of dominated sort of certain spheres of the media and everything over the last few years, is that we're all just a bit confused, I think. Is chivalry male toxicity, And I think that a lot of it I am still a believer in intention, a massive believer in intention. If your intention is to be kind, is to be good, is to protect, is to be generous, then if you get it wrong, it will still land okay. But if your intention is to sort of be a bit creepy or whatever, then whatever you do is going to land badly. And I know that some of those things can be confusing sometimes, and there's a lot of social intelligence that goes into getting those sorts of social interactions right versus wrong. But I think that we need to come back to that.
It's confusing if you want to get so far into the weeds that you're sat in a echo chamber online about what it means to be a male, or like is it weird to open a door for a woman? Like you say, intention. Like I would open a door for anyone. I'd give my seat up for anyone. It's not because she's female or he's male in any way, but I think I feel woefully underqualified. This whole conversation, I do feel woefully underqualified to even have an opinion on it. But I keep going back to, I think, I guess my sort of ending thoughts would be that we need to just go back to basics. Of everyone needs to be looking after themselves first of all, doing the basics, sleep, exercise, nutrition, all the rest of it, and finding something that makes you interested. Because if I'm a bloke and I'm in a job which I absolutely hate, and I know I'm being left behind because I didn't stick in at school, and the only thing I can do is manual labor, you can see how this principle, which seems to get bandied around about 80% of the women want 20% of the men, and blah blah blah, like all of this stuff that gets bandied around in these echo chambers is really about people being, one, the boys will get left behind because we're not doing as well in school, and then jobs, and then you could be quite a well-to-do woman, for example, that might not necessarily want to marry and go out with someone who isn't degree qualified or is just carrying heavy things. So I think there's a huge amount of, we're living in one of the most, have you heard of VUCA before? We're living in the most volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous time that has ever existed on the planet. Not just men, humanity is in a flat spin. We're sending people to Mars and we're ruining our planet. The climate's changing. There's like, if you focus on all the things that are happening in the world that are negative, it becomes very difficult to know what's right and what's wrong. So that's why I always think go back to the basics of like, be grateful for what you have, find something that's, that you're passionate about and follow that, and be a kind person, be nice, and look after all of those basics, not just as a man, but develop, I would say it to a young man, develop your character, spend time developing a strong character, courage, moral courage, doing the right thing when it's the hardest thing to do, when no one's watching, honesty, integrity, I guess humor, wisdom, all of these things that I would say is about a strong character. Health is one of them. Like, you are a leader, you are going to be a leader. All of these people we're talking about are going to be running our country at some point. And it's important that they realize with psychological safety in their groups that they can develop a strong character. As a male, you can be a strong character, but it comes back to what your intention is.
Yeah, and related to that and the intention point, I think, that's very related to this conversation, right? It should be clear to anybody listening that the three of us are doing this because we care about building a better future for both men and women. And I'm ready for the fact that somebody's going to send me a DM on Instagram telling me that I'm a terrible person for this thing I said and how much of a misogynist I am. Like, it'll probably happen, but it does frustrate. It doesn't bother me anymore, really. I just get frustrated that it's quite clear that we're all here trying to do some good. You don't have to agree with everything I said or Aldo said or Hazel said, but you can email me, and if it's kind and you challenge me, I'll probably reply. Like, I'm into this. I'm up for it. And, with everything Aldo's saying about the state of the world and everything that we've got to fix collectively, that can be so overwhelming. And I'm a big advocate for, you don't have to fix everything. Pick one thing to focus on if you have capacity and agency. But I think, to the men out there, be vulnerable, become better. You can do it. There's great pride to be found in it. To the women out there, men are not your enemy.
And let them be vulnerable.
Let them be vulnerable. Like, we're kind of scared of you, like, not physically, but because we want to do this right for you. We want to get this right. And I think that we are told regularly that we aren't getting it right in an unconstructive, pretty damning aggressive way. And actually, we care about you, and we're worried if we get it wrong, we'll be treated and labeled as bad men. But we're trying. Like, help us get it right, please, because we're really working on it.
Right. Beautiful parting notes from both of you there. All right. Thanks so much. It's been great.